Okay, phenology. All right, we're gonna kind of move through this pretty quickly. This really is review from 1104 at this point, so you should know a lot of this, right? So the phenology is just really the study of the growth stages of the grapevine, really kind of how it relates to natural, cyclic, seasonal phenomena. We break it down into 5 major stages. Bud break, which is that first growth in the spring. Bloom, which is flowering. And then Veraison, which is the onset of color change. And that's also when we get a massive increase in sugar, when stuff starts to get ripe. And then, of course, harvest. And then dormancy. Okay. We can use a thing called the Eichhorn-Lorenz system. We use now what's called a modified system. It was modified slightly in 95. There's a couple other phenology systems out there. This is typically what's used in the English-speaking world. They're just really more for research. I like to use it in the vineyard when I'm doing some scouting because it helps me focus in on things, but it helps you look at the growth cycle in finer detail. So this is what the Eichhorn-Lorenz system looks like. We have these what are called EL numbers, and we can really detailed look at phenology. But on a practical level, as grape growers, we only care about what I told you: bud burst or bud break, flowering, veraison, and harvest, and then leaf fall and dormancy. Okay. This is the cycle. I've showed you this before in 1104. Bud break, bloom, veraison, harvest, dormancy. Right? We just do that over and over and over, and that's farming. Okay. Interestingly, vines have kind of an internal clock to monitor the season. There's these proteins that are light sensitive. So it's not that the vine is necessarily knows the time of year it is because of the amount of time of daylight. It's more has to do with the wavelength of light that's being emitted from the sun, right? As we move into the fall, the sun is more in the south. Is that right? Yeah, it changes angle, right? So it's emitting different wavelengths and stuff the way it's hitting the atmosphere, right? So these proteins that can kind of sense that, and that's kind of actually the major driver of phenology. But temperature and other stresses and things can modulate it, right? So truly, yes, while the light is telling kind of the grapevine's responding to light wavelengths and stuff and responding to season, it really is kind of responding to temperature, right? So as you get higher temperature, phenology accelerates. So in those warm years, you're going to get veraison sooner, you're going to get harvest sooner. In the cool years, veraison's going to be pushed out, harvest will be pushed out. Simple, okay? Because day length doesn't really change year to year, right? That's always going to be the same cyclical thing. What's going to alter phenology is really things like temperature, and then also things like other kinds of stresses like water stress. Okay. Oh, going the wrong way. All right. But because of this kind of thing, with the day length, if you're in an area like around the equator, then you have the same day length, basically, right? All throughout the year. You don't have much change in it. Because of that, and because it's pretty warm all the time, those vines don't go into dormancy. And you need to, right? Because you want to get more crop. So you need to go into some kind of dormancy and then wake the plant back up. So they do have a wine industry, and this is why most grape growing happens between 30 to 50 degrees north and south, so that you can get that dormancy. If you're equatorial, then you don't go into a dormancy. So you need to force it. So like in Brazil, where there is a wine industry, actually Moet Chandon, the famous champagne house, has a sparkling wine winery there. In Brazil, there are areas high elevation in Brazil that do go into short dormancies naturally, but they also in some areas do have to force dormancy, and you do things like spraying out PGR, plant growth regulators, like ethylene, putting the vine into a water stress if you can, and mechanically defoliating it with de-leafers. And then you let it go into this kind of forced dormancy for a couple weeks, a month. Vines really don't have to be dormant for that long. And then you just wake them up with a product called hydrogen cyanamide, which is Dormex, is the trade name. And they can get 2 crops in a season in equatorial regions. Okay, so like I said, these are the key phenological stages. This is including fruit set here, but flowering and fruit set, you can kind of think of kind of the same thing, right? It's flowering and then you create the fruit. Okay, that's like fruit set's like the very end of flowering. All right. So winter dormancy is key to know. It's key to understanding, especially if you're going to be in your project talking about an area where you have really cold winter temperatures, like here in the Finger Lakes. This is critical to understanding how to manage your system, because you want vines that are going to survive the winter here. So vines, as they go into dormancy, they lose water in their buds, and then they accumulate carbohydrates when they're doing that in those buds. And that allows their freezing temperature to go down. And that's what you're seeing here. An LTE 50 is lethal temperature exotherm 50. And this is when, like, so say we're here in September, our LTE 50 is negative 10 C. That means if it gets to negative 10 C at this point in September, then we're going to lose 50% of our buds. Okay, so an LTE 50 is the temperature at which, when reached, you're going to lose approximately 50% of your buds to freezing. Okay, so what you're seeing here is the vine is acclimating to cold temperatures in the fall. The colder those temperatures are in the fall, the deeper this curve gets, right? Colder your fall temperatures are, the more hardy you're going to be midwinter at maximum hardiness, right? The colder it is in the fall, you're going to lose more water and accumulate more solutes in your buds, and then you're going to achieve maximum hardiness. Okay, you achieve maximum hardiness roughly midwinter. This is what's called endodormancy here, where the vine's going into its dormant period, and then it needs some kind of chilling hours of dormancy. The number of chilling hours is very low for a grapevine. We don't really truly know what it is. There's not a finite number there, but it's not much. So of like temperatures under like 40 degrees, you really don't need that long. So you go into endodormancy. Then here is what's called ecodormancy at the end of this thing as we approach springtime. And ecodormancy, this is really you're just waiting for temperatures to be such, like, to be consistently above 50 degrees. And now the vine's going to wake up and start metabolizing and delivering water to the buds and start growing, right? And it's going to be deacclimate. Okay. So like I said, dormancy is induced by shortening photoperiods and leaf senescence. And then cold temperatures are required to develop cold hardiness, like I said. Okay. Then dormancy, when you start getting into ecodormancy, where you're just kind of the only reason the vine hasn't broken bud is really because the temperatures aren't conducive to bud break. You'll start to see it transition when you start to see sap flow. So you'll cut into the vine as we're pruning. We'll start to see it dripping out, and that's how we know things are really starting to move, starting to get ready to break. All right, and that's kind of mostly influenced by soil temperature and soil water content. But also, of course, rootstock, like I said before, Riparia gloware, it will start moving sap before something like 3309 or 420, something like that. So, or SO4 110R. So RG will like basically always be your first rootstock to start sap flow, generally. Okay, and sap flow generally will start when soil temperatures get above 45 degrees Fahrenheit. Bud break typically occurs when above ground temperatures are kind of consistently on average above 50 degrees. Okay, generally. All right, that's that. This is bud break. So this here is bud break. This is not bud break. This is actually slightly past bud break. This is me nitpicking. But I do have a graduate degree. And that's what you get to do when you have a graduate degree, is be super nitpicky about things that don't matter. So this is bud break. It's like right when the first leaf margin, right when you can see that first leaf margin, not when it peels away, just when you can see it. Okay. Yeah. So you start to see that sap flow. The buds start to get woolly. This is called woolly bud here. And then they break open. Like I said, yeah, it's generally when bud temperatures, not air temperatures, but bud temperatures are above 50 degrees on average every day. We say air temperature, it's because of growing degree days. Honestly, buds break before 50 degrees Fahrenheit, but it's generally around 50 when we start to see this happen. So before bud break, when things are all woolly like this, we're not worrying about frost. After bud break, then we're starting to worry about frost. Once we get green tissue out on that grapevine, it's susceptible to frost. Okay, this is just to show you what I was just talking about with base temperatures for bud break. And it's saying, all these are kind of below 5 degrees Celsius. So so this is showing that while in the grape world we're like, yeah, it's like 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Like when it's that's usually when we see bud break. The truth is it's not. It's lower than that. But but honestly, practically it doesn't really matter. As a grape grower, I'm looking at average temperatures of the days, and when I know that I'm getting into like consistently, I'm averaging 50s. That's really when I'm starting to pay attention to the buds, and I start to see things swell. So, okay, I keep going the wrong way. So yeah, like I said, different rootstocks will break differently. Some will advance phenology of the scion more. So Riparia will advance the scion more than like Berlandieri will typically be some of your later bursting stuff. Variety also. Gewürztraminer will break well before Riesling breaks. Gewürztraminer is typically your first variety to break. Okay. Chardonnay as well, Pinot Noir. Okay. So often I say like Chardonnay, like for me in Oregon, Chardonnay on Riparia Gauloise is the canary in the coal mine because it's the first thing in phenology, right? It's the first thing to break bud. It's the first thing to flower. It's the first thing to veraise. It's the first thing to get to harvest. Okay. It's also canary in a coal mine because Chardonnay gets powdery mildew like nobody's business. Ooh, okay, there we go. Oof, sorry for this. I don't know what happened to these slides. But so what happens with bud break is you start replenishing the water in those buds. The carbohydrates are delivered to the buds, but the solute concentration in the bud goes down. And then you get bud break. Okay, I'm gonna skip cavitation stuff. Be mindful of your time. And like I said, we've already been over this. Generally, so vines are using their internal carbohydrate reserves from bud break to flowering. Okay, and that's it. They grow really quickly early on. So you get a new leaf every 3 to 5 days on a shoot. Okay, great. By the way, just these little rosettes, the reason they're rosy is because those are actually anthocyanins, which are the same things that create the color in the fruit. which is kind of neat. We don't really know the purpose that serves. It probably has something to do with protecting from solar radiation, as well as like some of the trichomes. They serve to protect against frost. They act as like a down, but also probably protecting the young tissue that can be easily damaged by solar radiation. All right, and then so once our shoots get to about 15-ish, 12 to 15, 17 nodes, that's when flowers start to come out, and that's when flowering starts to initiate, and that's when our grapevine starts to switch over from being like a net importer or a net user of its internal carbohydrate reserves. Then it starts to build its tank back up, and now it's the leaves become net exporters of carbohydrates. Okay. Oop, I'm going the wrong way again. All right. Okay, so shoot growth in a grapevine, it has what's called apical dominance. So the upper shoots are going to push first. Okay, and then it's going to go down sequentially down here. So what you can see here is they've left these giant spurs. And then you can see this is starting to push up there, right? So this is a technique where you can do what's called double pruning, and it actually will delay the buds from breaking down here. So that's pretty cool. That's a way for you to delay by like a couple weeks maybe the bud break down here. So you could let those break, then go through and cut your spurs, and then that might take you through the 2 weeks of frost-prone springs. Okay? Oh, I keep going backwards. Sorry about that. Yeah. So generally, shoot growth starts lagging at bloom time, and then the vines basically is kind of focusing on setting fruit, and then shoot growth resumes again. And then it will kind of stop around Veraison generally. Kind of slows down, and then really the vine is focusing all of its efforts on the fruit. Okay, but the vine does have what's called indeterminate growth, where it really doesn't stop growing until something forces it to stop. So that might be water stress, that might be some kind of nutrient stress, or wind, or maybe the vine just wants for nothing and just keeps growing until what stops it is daylight and temperature, and we get into the fall. Okay. Vigor, you're going to hear me say this a lot in this class. Vigor is just the rate of shoot growth. It's often correlated to vine size as well. Like a vine that's very vigorous is quite big usually and has quite dense canopy, but not always. Sometimes it's just growing really quickly. Okay. And all of these things can influence vine vigor, right? So scion and rootstock, environmental conditions, soil conditions, like nutrients and all that. That's, vine age. Typically as vines age, like young vines will be quite vigorous, and then as they age, the vigor goes down. Even though vine size, right, the trunk size can be quite big on old vines, but the rate of growth is going to be slow on old vines. Okay? And pruning severity. If we prune to less buds, then vigor increases. If we prune to more buds, vigor diminishes. So like I said, vigor declines with age because really it's the vines that's trying to maintain its own permanent structures, having to deliver a lot of things to the permanent structures rather than to the growing stuff. Yeah, I'm gonna move through this pretty quickly. You really don't need. This is all kind of intuitive. Less water and nutrients, of course, the vines are going to be less vigorous. You're also going to have less reserves over time. Yeah, I'm going to move through those and that. And I'm going to move through all that, and then we're going to get to bloom time. All right, so bloom roughly occurs like 12 to 17 leaves are separated-ish. The caps fall off. So remember, a grapevine they have caps. These are the petals. They open upside down. That's the petal of a flower. They open upside down, and the flower pollinates itself, and we get fruit set. Okay. Generally, when the weather is warm, dry, but the vines aren't in a water stress, that's when we have our highest fruit set. When they're cool and wet, if it's cool and wet during flowering, then we have problems with fruit set. So what happens is the anthers swell up. These are the anthers here. They swell, it pushes this cap off, and then there's an explosive release of pollen from the anther onto the stigma, and then you form a like a pollen tube down here, and then you fertilize these eggs, and you create berries. The optimum temperature is roughly this kind of 77 to 86. You can really kind of think 75 to 85. 75 to 85 degrees Fahrenheit is like, it's good for you, it's good for the plant, it's good for most organisms. If you have temperatures below 50 degrees Fahrenheit during flowering, that's going to be a bummer. You're going to have problems. You're not going to have good set. You're really probably not going to have any set. And then temperatures above 95, you have really hot flowering. That's also going to cause major issues. Okay. If temperatures are optimum, it's pretty quick for a flower to fertilize. It can take about 12 hours. It needs to happen within 72 hours, or it'll essentially just abort, and then you have flowering disorders, which I'll show you. Flowering success is not great. So in Pinot Noir, like an average Pinot Noir cluster will be about like 100 berries, but the reality was you had about 250 florets that flowered. So you have these issues like shatter. This is also called coulure in French, where oftentimes I see this like in Oregon when we have cool weather or rainy weather at flowering, and they just kind of abort, right? So you have these little like underdeveloped berries here. It's really kind of the biggest issue here is yield loss. It doesn't really do much for wine quality, but you have major yield loss. When we have really heavy shading in front of the cluster, we can also have this issue. Also, if you have what's like a big flush of nitrogen at flowering, you can have this issue. So sometimes you really don't want to, if you're going to put nitrogen on your soil, maybe avoid doing it directly at flowering because it can cause shatter. Hens and chicks, or millandage in French, is this issue where you have these parthenocarpic berries. Parthenocarpy is seedlessness. That's a fancy word that you can take with you. So those little berries there are seedless. They are often more advanced in phenology than the big seeded berries. So you have kind of uneven ripening on this cluster. This might be something like 24 bricks. This hasn't even gone through Veraison. 24 bricks, this would be like 7 bricks, maybe 6 bricks. So that's kind of a problem, right? You don't have homogeneity in your ripening. Again, this can happen because of cold, rainy weather during flowering. Also, something like boron deficiency can do this. And fan leaf, like I talked about before, Courtenay, that's vectored by Xiphinema index, the nematode. Okay. I already went over flower initiation, so we talked about that, how it begins in the season before. So for maximum inflorescence primordia, so maximum kind of clusters per shoot in the next season, really kind of right before bloom, you want higher radiance temperatures and waters to be at its within those optimum, right? Flower initiation itself. So like basically the number of clusters per shoot is determined the year before you actually crop it. Then the number of florets per inflorescence are determined kind of at bud swell. So at bud swell of the current year, if temperatures are nice and warm, the buds aren't, you have enough nutrient reserves, you have enough carbohydrate reserves, the water supply is good, then you'll have maximum numbers of florets per inflorescence. So then, you're setting yourself up good for the season. All right. This is what a berry looks like. You don't really have to know much here other than like the outer part of a berry is where most of the aromas are in most fruit, except for high terpene varieties like Gewürztraminer, Muscat, that kind of thing. Those aromas exist a lot in the mesocarp and those varieties. But generally, most of the aromas, and most really the great stuff around in a grape is located in the skin and the area just beneath the skin, so the exocarp. Okay, There's a bit of phenolics in here. That's the kind of bitterness and astringency you get in red wines. And then also there's a lot of potassium in the skins. And that's why red wines, when you ferment them on the skins, that's why you see pHs go up through fermentation. You're releasing potassium over time. The mesocarp is mostly just sugar, water, acid. Usually not much going on. Again, that's not true for terpene-driven varieties because they have a lot of those terpenes within the mesocarp. And then when you get into the endocarp, the area in the seeds, around the seeds, a lot of phenolics in those seeds. They can be kind of rough, right? That's kind of what's there. All right. So yeah, it's a berry is primarily water, then it's sugar, and then it's just like organic acids is the remaining. So these are the main acids in a grape are tartaric and malic acid, followed by a little bit of citric acid, and then there are some other organic acids, but these two here probably make up, I think, about 85% to 90%, and this might be about kind of 3 to 5% of the organic acids. And then the rest of the grape is like all the other, all the other stuff, the aromas and stuff, very small percentage. This is how berry formation works. It's a double sigmoidal curve. This is just useful to know because what happens is, so you get fruit set, and then during this period of time, so this is a pretty complex diagram, but what happens is you can see tannins are starting to accumulate. So you have tartaric acid and tannin accumulating, and malic acid accumulates, and then malic acid and methoxypyrazine reach their maxima at this point here, and then this is lag phase where the berry lags out in weight. So you reach 50% roughly of your final harvest weight, and then malic acid degrades over time through Veraison, and things like methoxypyrazines also degrade over time. So I would spend a little bit of time looking at this. You can see this is bricks here, so it's showing Veraison occurring kind of roughly 7 or 8 bricks, and then a rapid increase in sugar. You can think of that really as a percentage of weight of the berry is sugar, okay? And you can see it's rapidly increasing sugar over time. You can see anthocyanins developing here. So anthocyanins increase, of course, with red grapes during Veraison, and then they do decrease slightly right before harvest. And then a lot of flavor compounds are actually being developed here, like the precursors. And then here they actually start to form the true precursors. I'm not going to go into too much detail there. Yeah. Then you also see stuff like this. The xylem. So notice here the xylem shuts down. So this is phase 1 of berry growth, and then you get to lag phase, and then Veraison, and basically right at Veraison, the xylem connection to the berry is essentially severed. There's essentially no xylem connection to the berry post Veraison. Why is that important? Because if we are stressing the grapevine out here, if we're putting the vine into a water deficit, then the berry growth will be limited. Then you'll increase your skin to juice ratio, which can increase your concentration of your wine and the flavors. Also, what's important about doing those deficits is it can upregulate some genes that codes for some secondary metabolites, flavors and aromas, right? And so you can get more flavor and aroma out of your wine, okay? So we often do that on the West Coast. We'll regulate it. We'll create a regulated deficit. And then here the xylem shuts down, and we can just take it out of the regulated deficit because now the berry is no longer influenced by our irrigation. Okay, great. And then eventually, so the phloem takes over and starts to load sugar into the berry, but by about 25, 26 bricks, the phloem connection to the berry is severed. It's kind of like 26 bricks. The phloem connection gets severed, and then any increase in bricks beyond 25 or 26 is basically just dehydration. It's not sugar loading. Okay, so that's what I've just gone through there, those 3 stages. Stage 1, which is a rapid growth of the berry. Stage 2 is the lag phase where there's no growth. And then stage 3 is the renewed growth and maturation of the berry. You will sometimes see diagrams like this. This is incorrect. Veraison, so that lag phase does not, Veraison does not occur at lag phase. Veraison occurs slightly after lag phase. Okay? So I'm going to move through these slides because I really just explained it using that diagram. Yeah, so like I said, again, roughly 25 Brix is when sugar loading stops. Anything after that is dehydration. Okay? And here you can see everything going down. So you can see this is Veraison here and to maturity. And you can see this is soluble solids increasing in a linear fashion. This is Brix. Again, you can see this is Veraison. You can see it reaches a maxima, and then it decreases slightly. So if you rely on it to harvest sooner, you might actually get a greater color, but it wouldn't be ripe, right? This is titratable acidity. You can see TA goes down over time because the grapevine is using malic acid as a respiratory substrate during Veraison. And then you can see malic acid getting used up in this example here, and then it kind of levels out, TA levels out. And then you can see pH increasing over time through ripening, as the organic acids are being used up. And also it's picking up potassium and displacing some of those hydrogen protons. So you can see this pH gets real high, slightly above 4 on this Cabernet Sauvignon in Brazil. Again, Veraison's when things change color and quickly ripen. This is, I just think, a really nice diagram where that Linda Veraison put together, showing the 3 stages of berry growth, but then she also put together this 3 stages of Veraison, which I kind of liked, where it's sugar and water accumulation, then the phloem stops at about 25, 26 Brix, and then it just dehydrates after that. Okay? All right. Cool. And then finally, you get the leaf senescence, and the leaves fall off, generally triggered by day length, but also temperature, and also things like frost events in the fall can cause leaves to fall off. When the leaves fall off, nutrients are exported from the leaves back into the storage organs, so those permanent structures, trunks, cordons, roots. Even clusters, right? If we get early leaf senescence, there has been some evidence that potassium remobilizes, and all those mobile nutrients, when you get a frost, they will remobilize back into the vine, and they may go into the cluster. And then you end up with high potassium juice, and therefore high pH juice when you have a fall frost event. So leaves will, if they don't get frosted off, they just kind of fall off normally. They can remobilize and store, they can remobilize about 50 to 80% of the nitrogen that's inside them, as well as about 50 to 80% phosphorus, and all these other nutrients. So it's pretty cool. All right. And that is it. So the first few lectures that y'all are going to get from me, like I said, this course is front loaded. So this kind of stuff sets you up for the rest of it. So as you guys now have this base knowledge, as you go and start tackling those peer-reviewed papers, and as we talk about everything else, you'll understand kind of the fundamental language surrounding grapevines. Okay, so don't fret if you're like, oh my word, that was a lot of information. It will get better, and you're going to find there's a lecture that's like 20 minutes long. So don't worry about it. You're totally fine. Okay, cool.